as a society, and I kind of want to get your guys' opinions on this as well. We have these notions that guys have to be this very just muscular, very sought, very somber, just human being, and that if you show emotions, that it's a sign of weakness. And having something like nightmares and admitting that you have fears, that also illustrates a sign of weakness, and it's not something that you hear people talk about from as much as we should.
I agree, but I do think that, especially in 2020, we are seeing more examples of positive male relationships, of men being able to come out and talk about their feelings and speak about things that are bugging them or things that they're upset about. So I think that in 1984, that was definitely more of a groundbreaking concept, and guys really being able to come out and say something along the lines of, like, I have nightmares too. Like, we have things that we worry and stress about as well. I still think that we're not quite where we need to be. I think, mostly from an older generation, I feel like there's a lot of like, suck it up, don't cry, be a man and tough it out, which is just, I hate that kind of toxicness that I see, especially on the internet. So I think there's a lot more positive examples now of guys being more in tune with their emotions and being able to feel vulnerable. But we definitely have a long way to go in that regard.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't a thing that people talked about back in the 80s. It was very much still, you had that, if you were a guy, you either fit into this jock stereotype where you kind of kept everything to yourself and you handled all the situations, took everything right off the chin. And now it's a lot more acceptable to talk about like how you feel and how you relate to things, and having fears and having nightmares and actually having issues that you could talk about and get help for. And I mean, shoot, even me growing up, I wouldn't admit that I had nightmares just because it felt like a sign of weakness. And we've finally gotten to a point where we can start to break that ground and share those kinds of things with people.
I remember growing up and just having this fear of, if I told people how I felt, that I would be considered less than a man or less than a human. And I know that we've joked about it on here before, but there was a period of time where like I wouldn't admit that I cried during movies, and now I passionately defend the movies I cry at, because apparently I'm cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, the movies that I cry at. But I think that science is starting to slowly understand the weight of how particularly this mindset of toxic masculinity, how it is starting to shape and take hold of people that are males, and moving forward, start to be more open with it. Dan, I think that you're right in saying that we are getting better, but I think right now that, you're always going to have a small portion of those people and those generational beings that are going to always have that suck it up, be a man mentality. And that kind of mentality, I think, is fairly harmful for a man's mental health. The fact that, you have men that can't admit that they're anxious or can't admit that they're scared or suicidal or depressed, it is only making it worse, because there's all that stigma that's attached to those topics and the sex of men.
Absolutely true. And one thing that the horror genre does well with so many different protagonists is it shows I think, a wide range in many areas, a wider range than what you would find in other genres like romantic comedies or action movies. But you see both men and women go up against insurmountable odds and need to deal with this horrible situation that they find themselves in. And with A Nightmare on Elm Street, it's really nice to see that there's some showboating and some like chauvinism there and stereotypical masculinity there, but there is also a lot of mutual respect, I feel like, between the main characters. And with a movie that really places its female characters front and center, and ultimately being the ones that need to kind of rise up and fight against Freddy-Krueger, it's, I think, lays the groundwork really well for some of the future female protagonists that we get to see. And of course, we saw it, Halloween comes to mind with Jamie Lee Curtis, and countless other movies where I think they've really taken the lead with this. And you see some of these smart and resourceful female characters really kind of take the lead and are able to come out on top when the odds are incredibly stacked against them.
I think more recently we've been seeing this shift in horror movies, specifically with the themes of mental health. And Dan, I think you're right in saying that, horror is the one genre that's kind of bold enough to take a mirror to our actual society and talk about how we process things. You look at movies like Get Out or Halloween 2018, or even, this is going to sound kind of random, but even last year's Ready or Not, just kind of processing the events of, what 40 years of preparation and PTSD has done to Laurie Strode, or what racism has done to this young man and Get Out. I really wish I remember the character's name. It's been Chris. What it's done to Chris, and then you also have the Samara Weaving's character from Ready or Not. The last shot of that particular movie, and I don't want to ruin it for anyone that hasn't seen it, is like just kind of summing up like that character's mental state. And I think that we're starting to enter into these conversations, and we're starting to see, walls come down and shackles be broken, because there's now safe zones that are being created. And I think for men especially, that's one of the reasons that I love being married. Is I love being married solely because I have that safe zone. So if I'm not having a good mental day, that I have people in place, my wife particularly, especially, that I can just go to and say, hey, like, I'm not having a good day today, and then talk about it. And then having the select group of guys that I can go to and say, hey, like, this is something I'm facing about. I just need someone to talk to right now. Is that cool? And then kind of hashing it out.
Yeah, I'm starting to get to that point in my marriage. I spent a lot of years bottling up how I feel and not talking about like my actual mental state. So I'm very used to just kind of pushing everything down and not talking about it, because that's just what I've always been expected to do. So now that I'm married, I have a hard time opening up to my wife, and I'm working on getting better at that. But it definitely makes it easier knowing that when I want to talk about how I'm feeling, I have somebody who's always there to listen and to help with anything that I could possibly need. So I'm 100% with you there on that one.
It's definitely important to have people that you can open up to and talk about and just really be yourself and be able to talk about some of those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and so we want to encourage you guys right now that if you or someone you know is listening and you guys are struggling, you need someone, we have resources in the show notes wherever you guys are currently listening, where you guys can find suicide prevention resources. But you guys can also find resources not only to those, but you guys can also find resources to check out Mike's Twitch channel as well. Where can people find you online, sir?
So on Twitch, I am the official Jaggerjaw. On Twitter, I am JaggerjawTTV. And Instagram, I don't remember my Instagram tag. I think I'm Mr. Mike Bean on there. Let me double check that real quick. Yes, Mr. Mike Bean on Instagram. I'm mostly active on Twitter and Twitch, though. I stream live 4 nights a week, all day Sundays. I actually have a 24-hour stream event coming up for October. I'll be doing that starting the 16th at 7 p.m. And I'm going to go 7 p.m. to 7 p.m. the next day. So I'll definitely get into the mind of the sleep-deprived Nancy at that point. Be doing mostly, I think I'm going to try and do all horror games, but if I start to feel myself get kind of anxious or paranoid, I'm going to switch over to something a little more lighthearted for a little bit just to pass the time. But I know for sure I'm doing a full playthrough of Resident Evil 7.
Oh,
so
nice.
We'll see how that goes for me and my mental state.
Probably for the best on that one. But you guys can find us everywhere at Victims and Villains. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and Letterboxd, and all of that. And past episodes, as well as suicide prevention resources, can be found at victimsandvillains.net. And we are also on Patreon at patreon.com/victims and villains. For as little as $1 a month, you guys can help us get mental health resources into schools and conventions and get access to exclusive content you can't get anywhere else. But Dan, the movie man, Rockwood, where can people find you?
You can find me over on Twitter at drock64, mostly retweet things that I find funny, things that make me laugh, as well as video game updates throughout from around the industry. So follow me there if you would like to.
And until next time, remember to keep talking nerd, talking hope, speaking nothing else, and never sleep again.